All right, let's jump right into a story well, it's pretty chilling. We're winding the clock back to 2017 to uncover a massive failure within the UK's National Health Service. This is a story about what happens when critical information just vanishes. Look at this number. Over 500,000. Let that sink in. This isn't just some abstract statistic. This represents over 500,000 patient records that were completely lost for years, inside the very system that was supposed to keep them safe. It was a shocking discovery, and it pointed to a deep, invisible flaw.
So what exactly went missing? We're not talking about junk mail, that's for sure. We're talking about the most critical medical documents you can imagine. Life-altering test results, updates on cancer treatments, referrals to specialists for urgent conditions. All of it was sent out, but it just never arrived. It simply disappeared into a digital black hole.
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. This has to be a sophisticated cyber attack, right? But here's the truly terrifying part of the story. This wasn't a malicious attack. It wasn't a hacker. It was a simple, profound, systemic oversight, an error that operated in absolute silence. And that brings us to the core concept here, something called a silent failure. You know, when your computer crashes, it's loud and obvious. You get the blue screen of death. Things freeze up. But a silent failure is way more sinister. It's when a system breaks but tells no one. The lights stay on, everything looks like it's working perfectly, but behind the scenes, the damage is just compounding, day after day, totally undetected. So, the big question is, how on earth does this happen? How does a system built to deliver life-saving information fail so massively and so quietly? Well, it wasn't just one mistake. It was a whole cascade of breakdown. Okay, let's walk through it. First, the NHS outsourced the handling of patient correspondence to a private firm. During a database migration, a tiny flaw was introduced into the system's code. Now, the system was supposed to raise a red flag anytime a letter couldn't be delivered to a doctor. But instead, this bug made it do the exact opposite. When it found an undeliverable letter, it didn't raise an alarm. It just quietly filed it away in a digital archive, out of sight and completely out of mind. And this really shows you the difference between the threats we prepare for and the ones that can actually hit us. A hacker is active, they're malicious, they create noise and set off alarms. This was passive. It was a simple internal logic flaw, operating in total silence. It wasn't an attack from the outside, it was a ghost in the machine. All right, enough about the technical glitch. Let's talk about what really matters here, the real-world consequences. Because behind every single one of those 500,000 records, there was a person, a family, waiting for news that was never going to arrive. The fallout was just immense. Patients missed life-saving cancer screenings. Critical diagnoses were delayed and, in some cases, with tragic results. This wasn't some little IT issue that got buried. Oh no, it exploded into a full-blown parliamentary inquiry. It sparked huge public anger, and it forced a complete top-to-bottom reevaluation of the NHS's entire digital backbone. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? If an online store loses your order, it's an annoyance. But in healthcare, a lost piece of data, a lost file, it's not just inconvenient, it's life-threatening. The stakes just could not be any higher. And as unbelievable as the NHS case is, this kind of silent failure is unfortunately not unique. In fact, it's part of a much bigger pattern in the history of databases, where these quiet little mistakes have led to some very loud, very painful consequences. You can see this pattern repeating across totally different industries. In finance, you had Wells Fargo using flawed algorithms that were silently and wrongly denying people loans, basically ruining their financial futures. Or HSBC, which had huge gaps in its anti-money laundering systems that just failed to flag billions in suspicious activity. The common thread here, the systems never crashed. They just hummed along quietly, doing the absolute wrong thing. And that's really the universal lesson here. It doesn't matter if it's a hospital or a bank. When a system is built in a way that hides its own mistakes, the harm doesn't just happen once. It multiplies over and over again in the dark. So what do we learn from a catastrophe like this? How do we stop another 500,000 people from falling into a digital void? Well, the investigation that followed gave us some very, very clear answers. These key lessons are basically a roadmap to a safer future. First, all healthcare data has to be traceable and auditable. You need to know where it's going. Second, we have to start thinking of silent failures as the most dangerous threat there is. Third, just because you outsource a system doesn't mean you've outsourced the responsibility. The buck has to stop somewhere. And maybe the biggest lesson of all is that data integrity isn't just an IT problem, it is a critical patient safety issue. Because every single record matters, every single patient matters. So, I want to leave you with this question to think about. We depend on countless automated, silent systems to run our lives every single day. Our health, our money, everything. But when those systems fail, and they will fail, in ways we can't see or hear, who is responsible for listening for the screams?